welcome to this event this evening on caring about the caregiver. I want to thank Deirdre and everyone at Migraine Ireland for organising it. It's a very important topic, and I'm very glad to be here with you all this evening, and thank you for having me. So as I said, our topic this evening is caring about the caregiver. This evening is all about you, and I hope that you will find something useful in what I share with you, even if that's just one or two things that resonate with you as a carer of someone, of a loved one that suffers from chronic migraine, even if it's just one or two things that you take away. So please note that for the purpose of the talk this evening, I am going to use the term carer or caregiver as a way to honor each and every one of you. So be that spouses, partners, friends, siblings, parents of loved ones who live with chronic migraine. Okay. I am talking to you, as Deirdre said, as a psychotherapist, but I'm also talking to you as someone who lives with MS. So I live with a chronic condition myself. I don't understand what it's like to live with migraines, but I do understand what it's like to live with basically the relentlessness of a chronic condition. And having MS myself for the last 7 years, I also know how complicated the relationship with loved ones who support me can get at times. And I would have personal experience of some of the challenges that are involved in that dynamic. Okay, so let's begin. All good, Deirdre? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay, perfect. So let's get going. So before we get into the content, I'm going to just invite you all just to take a moment. We're just going to slow right down. It's 6:30 on a Monday evening on a cold November day. So I'm going to invite you to just get comfortable, gather yourself, settle into the moment here and now with me. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be a certain way. You have absolutely no responsibility in this moment other than to be present. So that might be new for you. Maybe you've had an extremely busy day. Even if you've had a quiet day, just embrace the fact that you don't have to do anything. Just listen. So you don't need to look at the screen if you don't want to. As I said as well, you can just listen. So all I ask is that you have an open heart and an open mind to the material and just take it in to the best of your ability. So this evening, we are focusing on three main areas of focus. One, the care that you give, the cost of caring, and then self-care for the caregiver. And as Deirdre said, we'll close out the evening with some time at the end for Q&A, or if there are no questions, even some comments, depending on time. So we will we will make sure to leave as much time as we possibly can at the end for that. Okay, so let's go to our first area of focus, that being the care that you give to your loved one who is afflicted by chronic migraine. And just as I said, just remember that I'm using the term carer or caregiver to refer to any type of support or help that you give, whether that's emotional support, whether that's very practical everyday supports, whether that's actually during your loved one having an attack. So just to remember that. So caregiving can have many rewards. For most caregivers, being there when a loved one needs you is a core value, and it's something that you naturally wish to provide them. What you do is extremely important, and that's what we're here about to acknowledge this evening. You may not realize it, but every time you support your loved one, you are showing them all of these characteristics on the screen, all of these very important, relevant traits. And please, this is not an exhaustive list either. This is just an example of some of the ways that you show support. Patience, compassion, you show attentiveness, dependability, trustworthiness, empathy, compassion, kindness, love, and advocacy. You may not be aware that you show all of these aspects to your loved one, but it's very, very likely that in whatever way you support that you do. So what you do is awesome, but it can also understandably be awesomely impactful on you. That's a lot of responsibility, and it can become too much at times if you're not also giving this to yourself, this type of care to yourself, or if you're not receiving it from another person. So how you give, when we care or when we show care to someone that is suffering or that is afflicted, we often feel like that means that we have to do everything we can in that moment to help. But sometimes the greatest support you can give someone is your invaluable, unconditional presence. Talking is not everything. Doing is not everything. So to give you just a little example of what I mean when I speak about invaluable, unconditional presence, I'll just speak a little bit to my own experience of receiving care from my loved ones. So for example, I often find myself wondering what it's like for my loved ones, my parents, my siblings, my friends, seeing me at my worst. And the one thing they always say to me is that they just feel extremely useless. There's nothing they can do for me to take the pain away, and that makes them feel really bad in themselves. As a result, I find that very moving, and I feel really bad for them. And I always try to remind them that all I really need from them is their compassion and their availability and their presence. For them to not be afraid, to not panic, to just be there, to not be pushy with me. For example, if my vertigo starts or I get extremely weak extremely quickly, to remember that even though I look and I am in that moment completely vulnerable and helpless, I still have a primal instinct about what's best for me. And what I need from them is to let me take the lead and for them to accompany me in that moment instead of them taking over. That is something that we have had to negotiate together over the years. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that whatever you're doing in providing care, do not underestimate how valuable your presence alone is. So there are different ways of support giving: informational, emotional, esteem, social network support, and tangible support. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of what each of these means. So informational support refers to the way you may accompany your loved one in their search for clarity and information that includes knowledge or facts. Emotional support is related to your expressions of how you care, your concern, your empathy, your sympathy, the validation, the respect, and the acknowledgement that you give. Esteem support is defined as the way that you help to promote your loved one's abilities, their intrinsic value, for example, by respecting their autonomy, and by trusting that they know what's best for them and that they don't need you to fix them, just accompany and assist them. Social network support sounds like a kind of funny one, you know, it's like when you hear that, it's like, what on earth is that? But essentially it refers to the help that enhances we're talking about here, enhancing someone's sense of belonging. And that may be a specific group with similar interests or situations, for example. But essentially, that type of networking, togetherness, online, socially, like even what we're doing here this evening is social network support. And then finally, one that you probably are all really familiar with is tangible support, which refers to the practical ways that you support your loved one that lives with chronic migraine. So if your friend or your family member or your partner lives with migraine, These are just some of the ways that you can help show your support. Again, these are just suggestions. They're just some examples. This is not an exhaustive list at all. Number one is believe them. It's number one because it is the most important one. Believe them. So when they tell you how it feels when they're having an attack, how they talk to you afterwards, how they talk to you the next day, believe them. Migraine is an invisible disease and it's an isolating, debilitating condition. Recognize and help alleviate migraine pain. I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, you know, you recognize it and you help alleviate the pain, but it sounds simple, but how do you do that? Because every person experiences migraine attacks differently. So one way is letting the person lead, trusting their autonomy to know what it is they need. Don't give up. Practice patience during all phases of an attack. Reflect mindfully about what not to say to the person. For example, oh, it's just a headache, you'll be fine. You know, or, sure, look, just, sure, you know, take a paracetamol, you'll be grand. Think about it, prepare and plan, and think about it in advance. Oftentimes, preparation and planning is the key to anything we do. Don't assume that you know what's best for them. In anticipation of knowing that you want to offer support, take time to consider what you can do when your loved one has a migraine. Make a plan. Another one that comes up oftentimes, as Deirdre said, I am a psychotherapist. I work with people that live with chronic pain, and I also work with carers of people that live with chronic conditions. And one that comes up a lot of the time, and in my own personal experience, is for the carer to not get offended. This is a really big one. Don't feel offended if your loved one refuses your offer of help or turns to someone else for comfort. It's absolutely understandable that you would feel that you would take it personally, or you would feel offended if your loved one dismisses you or is rude to you or whatever it might be. And sometimes it may be that you need to be offended, and it may be something that you need to bring up with your loved one at another point. But the majority of the time, it's important that you know that it's likely that it's their own stuff, their own emotional baggage that they're dealing with in that moment, and that becomes reflected in their behavior towards you. So supporting yourself by not feeling offended. So for example, maybe your loved one is experiencing guilt or shame. They're feeling burdensome and disruptive to your life. This will be reflected in their behavior at times towards you. So it doesn't always mean that they don't appreciate your support and your help. It may just mean that in that moment, they are struggling to receive kindness from you because maybe they're feeling really bad about themselves and they don't feel like they deserve help. That is the literal definition of guilt and shame. So you can see from that example that it's very important that you don't take it personally. It's most likely that it's the person's own emotional struggle that is reflected in their behavior. And another one is, what are your assumptions? This is a really big one that comes up as well. To reflect and think about, what are my assumptions now about my loved one now that they live with a chronic condition? Do you assume that they are helpless? You may not mean to, but you may assume certain things about your loved one. So it can be useful to reflect on these assumptions. And as you can hear from what I've been talking about in this first area, in this first section of the talk, there is a lot of speculating about what might and might not be helpful in caregiving. So I suggest consider including your loved one. To not be afraid to include your loved one who lives with migraine in your speculating, and make a care or help plan together. So perhaps you could do this together on a day that your loved one is having a good day or one of their better days. And to not be afraid to communicate about these aspects and negotiate this care and health plan together. Okay. So now we're moving on to the next area of focus, which is the cost of caring. So basically what I mean when I say the cost of caring is acknowledging how hard it is caring for someone, the importance of acknowledging the challenges of caring for someone. For example, a shift in the roles and emotions in your relationship with that person is almost certain. Stress as a caregiver, emotional and physical stress of caregiving is real. It's common, it's understandable, it's normal, and it's perfectly okay. It's normal for you to have conflicting feelings. Helping someone makes us feel really good. But feeling useless can be very unsettling to us as human beings. We often struggle greatly with uncertainty and not knowing. It can be very traumatic to watch someone you care about in pain or struggling. Caregiving is also hard because you may see many changes in your loved one. You may feel scared, sad, lonely, unappreciated. You may feel anger, frustration, anguish, and exhaustion. You may feel guilty or feel that life isn't fair. You may feel resentful of the person you are caring for. All of these feelings, again, are common, understandable, normal, and absolutely okay. As a caregiver, you may be so focused on your loved one that you don't realize your own health and well-being are suffering. So a lot of you may find yourselves struggling in silence, and there may be some things I have said that resonate with you. You may find yourself going, yeah, it is extremely hard. I don't acknowledge how hard it is sometimes. So for example, you may not know this, but caregivers who are vulnerable as a result of attending to family members with chronic and long-term illnesses are often referred to as hidden carers or the hidden patients. So hidden carers or hidden patients refers to informal carers who may not recognize themselves as a carer, and consequently, they're less likely to access support. People who experience caregiver stress can be vulnerable to changes in their own health, but helping someone should not hurt you. That's a really important one. Helping someone shouldn't hurt you. So when I say hurt you, I mean, for example, when the giving impedes your own ability to thrive in your own life. And you have a right to thrive in your own life. And I mean, look, in Irish culture, it sounds really selfish. How dare I thrive when my loved one is struggling? That's the guilt again. How dare I focus on me when my loved one is having all of these challenges? We are conditioned. We're conditioned to culturally to be selfless, to make anyone else a priority other than ourselves. I mean, the idea of, can you imagine saying this to someone? I'm the most important person in my life. People would think you're mad. If you said that, I deserve to thrive, they'd think you were losing it. It's about, we're conditioned to put other people ahead of us. But you have the right to be the priority in your own life and still provide and offer love, support, and great care to your loved one. So I'm going to invite you right now in this moment to just take a moment and ask yourself, who is the most important person in your life? So just take a moment and just think about it. And just notice whatever the first answer is that comes to mind. Who is the most important person in your life? So some of you may be thinking, my child, my children, my partner, my parents. But the right answer is you. You are the most important person in your life. If you are not okay, you can't expect yourself to support someone else. And if you do, it will be very challenging for you. I often think of, and I always find it really useful, and it always gives me a swift reminder about, self-care in order to be a caregiver, is I think of a mother and a child on a plane. The example of a mother and child on a plane, they're seated beside each other, their belts are on, they're in the sky, they're flying, and the air mask's strapped down. And the mother has to put her air mask on first before she puts it on the child. It's a rule, it's standard practice, it's universal, and yet it sounds and might feel strange to us. But it makes sense. The mother has to be okay in order to be available and present to her child. So right now, and I'm going to ask you to just do another little thing. I invite you to take a moment and replenish your empty cup just right now. So in other words, I want you to intentionally think about what brings you joy and brings you back to yourself. What fills your cup up when it's empty or nearly empty? So, for example, for me, it's listening to a guided meditation in silence, with nobody around me, and it helps me just reconnect with my breath and brings me back to my body and brings me back to myself. What helps you? So you just think of one, just one. Could be nature, music, drawing, writing, reading. Just think of one thing that helps you feel like you and helps you refill your cup. So when you are running on empty, you have to refill your cup, because unfortunately, things like compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and caregiver stress or caregiver burnout are real. They are real. So I'm just going to go into a little bit about what compassion fatigue is, okay? And vicarious trauma and caregiver burnout are kind of conceptualized as I talk about compassion fatigue, okay? So compassion fatigue can be characterized by emotional and physical exhaustion, leading to a diminished ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. In other words, it's often described as the negative cost of caring, and it is sometimes referred to as secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. Compassion fatigue is a term that describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others, often through experiences of stress or trauma. So you may not think it, you may have realized for yourself that, being a carer or providing care or giving care to a loved one afflicted with chronic migraine, it can be stressful for you and for them at times. You may not have considered it traumatic for you. And it can be very traumatic seeing your loved one like that. The different triggers, how it impacts you, what are the behaviors that emerge, the triggers, the being in that unpredictable situation, wanting to do the best you can, wanting to do what's right, not getting, making mistakes, getting it wrong, not always being able to get it right. There's a lot of things that can be very traumatic about caregiving. Compassion fatigue is often mistaken for burnout, but burnout is more the cumulative sense of fatigue or dissatisfaction, a cumulative sense of that over a chronically long period of time. While burnout is one part of this form of fatigue, the term compassion fatigue encompasses a more specific experience, which may be brought about by excessive caregiving or lack of resources. So again, that brings us right back to the importance of self-care for the caregiver. So compassion fatigue is sometimes called secondary stress reaction, second-hand shock, secondary traumatic stress, or vicarious trauma. Compassion fatigue occurs when these triggers and experiences start to affect your thoughts, moods, and your own well-being. So being affected by the care that you give your afflicted loved one is a very normal part of caregiving. But when that feeling becomes overwhelming, you may be experiencing compassion fatigue. While the symptoms of compassion fatigue can sound frightening and be frightening and sometimes debilitating, there can be very simple, very practical steps you can take to heal and to help yourself. Recognizing the signs, taking proactive preventative measures, and seeking treatment can all be extremely helpful. So some of the signs and symptoms to watch out for with compassion fatigue include mood swings, experiencing detachment. So for example, finding yourself, isolating yourself, withdrawing from social groups, social connections, relationships, maybe feeling a sense of, experiencing a sense of numbness or emotional disconnection. Also, a symptom of compassion fatigue can be some anxiety or depression, feeling demoralized, like questioning your effectiveness, intrusive self-doubt and critical thinking, or self-critical thinking. Another symptom can be insomnia. And compassion fatigue can also hold a host of physical bodily symptoms like exhaustion, fatigue, headache, digestive issues, changes in appetite. So it's just to inform you. So the right treatment for compassion fatigue depends on your own individual experience. Compassion fatigue is very subjective, it's very personal, and it's very unique to each person because of their unique circumstances. And common treatments, if you like, include self-care and/or seeking professional help if and when required. And I just want to say that if any of you listening to this are feeling like any of those symptoms or how I've described compassion fatigue, if it sounds familiar to you, or you feel like you might be experiencing some type of compassion fatigue, that you're very welcome to reach out to Deirdre at Migraine Ireland. And if you would like to chat further with me about it, you can also reach out to Deirdre and she will give you my contact information. Okay, so that's just an offering if that's something that somebody wanted. So as we talk about the importance, the significance of self-care, let's move on to our next area of focus. Care for yourself while caring for others. So remember that care providers, caregivers, carers, support givers, whatever terminology is suitable to you, you need acknowledgement, respite, and empathy, because you are a care provider. You give and you give and you give, but you need acknowledgement, respite, and empathy. Is extremely important. So acknowledgement means recognizing the role you are in order to help yourself receive the support that you need. Acknowledge the care that you give. Give yourself permission to be helped. Acknowledgement also means understanding that it is normal to not fully understand what your loved one is going through. You cannot walk another person's path, just as they cannot fully understand what it is like for you being in the support position. Accepting your role and being mindful of how you go about your supporting. Be honest with yourself about your own limitations. This is important because it will support your relationship with your afflicted loved one better than overextending yourself and overextending yourself with no communication. And that can lead to conflict and even sometimes resentment between you both. So what we're talking about here is natural relational dynamics. We impact one another. Whether you walk past a person on the street, a complete stranger, whether you sit down and just have a coffee with someone, whether it's at home with a loved one, whatever it might be, we're talking about relational impacts. We impact each other all day long, every day. So, for example, when I talk about acknowledge, I'm encouraging you to acknowledge what's going on for you. So, for example, sometimes I can see it in people's faces when I tell them about my own condition. They kind of, you can see the discomfort, or they don't know how to respond, or you can see the kind of fear in their face. And I've kind of had to learn, I've realized I've had to learn to accept that that's not a reflection on me. That's actually a reflection of their own fear of having a chronic condition like chronic migraine. So your loved one might be living a trauma that terrifies you. And that in turn is going to naturally impact your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. It may be very triggering for you. And that is all completely normal and natural. And another thing to acknowledge and relieve yourself of is that it's not the person, it's not your loved one who lives with chronic migraine. It's not their job, or it's not their responsibility to make you understand what it's like for them living with migraine. It's important to acknowledge and accept this. You know, just like you may feel like it's impossible for you to, for other people to understand, or to make other people understand what it's like for you in the more support giving role. Respite means not losing yourself in being a caregiver. Providing care for a loved one can be rewarding, but it can also be very challenging. So even for the most resilient people, I don't care how resilient you consider yourself to be. I mean, caring for a loved one, providing any type of support giving is going to be impactful, and it's going to be a strain or challenge, a struggle in some type of way. Empathy, let me see. Empathy means your need to receive empathy too. So, you know, not just emptying yourself or emptying your cup by giving and giving and giving. You know, you give compassion to your loved one, but you need self-compassion too. So self-compassion is giving the same kindness to ourselves that we would give to others. And that's what I mean when we talk about compassion and self-compassion. So if we look at it in the terms of like a yin and a yang form of caring. So in other words, the yin and the yang of self-compassion. So if we look here at the yang, as you care, as you provide support in whatever medium of support that you give, esteem, emotional, tangible, informational, whatever it might be, you protect, you provide, and you motivate. And they are actions in the world. And for there to be a yang, there has to be the yin, the balancing of the yin, where you have comfort, there's soothing, and there's validating of self, being with ourselves. So this is just, it might be a helpful way to look at it. It might be a useful thing because it's easy to remember the yin and the yang. There has to be the balance of both. Okay, so I'm saying basically you need acknowledgement, respite, and empathy. You are important too, and you need all of those things as well. So how can you get this for yourself? These again are just some examples. Some of them might be a bit repetitive from other things that have come up earlier on in the talk. So sorry if I'm repeating myself with some of the items, but they're important to name and identify in this list. Okay, so we're talking about ways of helping yourself. In other words, prevent caregiver burnout, caregiver stress, to self-care, to care for yourself while caring for others. Accept help. In other words, making room for caretaking. Focus on what you are able to provide. Know your limitations. This is crucial. It might be normal to feel guilty sometimes. I'm not doing enough. I'm doing too little. I'm exhausted. I can't give any more today. But how can I not help? I mean, it's a complex thing that's happening for you in this internal struggle. And that's why we say the hidden care or the hidden patient. A lot of the time, maybe you don't realize it, you are struggling in silence more than perhaps you realize. But no one is a perfect caregiver, nobody. You do the best and you make the best decisions you can at any given time. And some of these items on the list may be things that you can genuinely consider implementing in your own life to make it that bit more, to have a bit more ease in the helping role that you're in or the support role that you're in. And you can guarantee then that in turn as well, that will benefit your relationship with your loved one that lives with chronic migraine. Setting realistic goals, extremely important. Realistic, and this involves the preparation and the planning that we talked about earlier. Talk to your afflicted loved one about how you are feeling. Oftentimes I have people react to that suggestion as I can't tell them how I'm actually feeling. How can I put that on them? So they're feeling guilty for burdening you. You don't want to burden them. And there's just this whole suppression of emotion and struggle, and none of it is being communicated. And both people are suffering. And so it's important to try to not be afraid to include your loved one in the decision-making process, or more accurately, in the making of the help or care plan process. Talk to them about how you are feeling. And you may actually be surprised by how important it is for your loved one who lives with chronic migraine to see that you're human too, that you struggle as well that you're struggling too, that you don't have it all together. This can be stabilizing, it can equalize the relationship, it can reinforce normality, and it can also stabilize the power dynamics in the relationship between you both. So again, don't assume, try not to assume that you cannot talk to your loved one about how you are doing or what's happening for you or how you are feeling. I'm sure a lot of you already do, and you know, your loved one that lives with chronic migraine, I'm sure it's very important to them to hear how you are doing in that as well. So it's just something to think about. Excuse me. Getting connected, finding out about, for example, finding out about caregiving resources in your community. If that seems a little bit too much, like looking outwards into the community, if that feels too big or anything like that, I mean, at this moment in time, there's so much material online to connect with, whether it's on Facebook platforms or Facebook groups, you know, support for support givers. Again, you could link in with Deirdre in Migraine Ireland and they will point you in the right direction, but get connected. Joining a support group, for example, talking to others who are in similar situations as you. This is about validation. It's about encouragement. It's about normalizing that you are not alone in how you feel. There are lots of people out there struggling in the support giving role that probably more than likely feel very similar things to you. So a support group can be a really good place to make or establish good friendships and bonds. Seeking social support, you know, making an effort for you to stay well connected with your own friends or family who offer you emotional support. Setting your own personal health goals. So I could bore you by going through a list of, you know, eat healthy, sleep routine, you know, get your physical exercise. I could tell you all that kind of stuff that you already know and do not need me to list out to you. So I'm not going to. But setting personal health goals, what I mean by that is essentially even going about the idea of committing to having goals for you personally. Acknowledging your right to goals for yourself, not losing yourself in your caregiving role. Acknowledgement, respite, and empathy. So that's what I mean when I'm saying setting personal health goals. I don't mean just your physical health. I mean your well-being, your emotional health. Non-negotiable respite is connected with your personal health goals. Non-negotiable respite, this could be 20 minutes of just you time. Is non-negotiably having self-care time for you, depending on your care situation, depending on what relationship it is, and depending on, again, it's personal for everybody, but making sure that you're doing something that's just for you, that it's meaningful to you, whether it's with your friends or doing your hobby, living your life. It's very important. Talk to your doctor, see your doctor. What I mean by that is some people have a good relationship with their GP, and oftentimes it can be reassuring or a comfort to them to have a consult with their GP if they don't want to, you know, talk to their friends, or they're not ready to talk to their loved one about how they're struggling in the caregiving position and in that role. For some people, not for everybody, but for some people, it can be a very useful first port of call for them to go to speak to someone and get it off their chest. And your GP might be able to make some recommendations and encourage you, you know, maybe suggesting counseling, and may point you in the right, signpost you in the right direction to some information pages as well that are very important. You know, I'm not going into the resource of medication, you know, because I'm not advocating for that or against it. That's not the point. The point is the option of consulting your GP if you feel comfortable to do so as a resource for you and you alone, if you don't want to go there with your friends or your loved one first, or other members of your family. So being honest with yourself and reflecting on your own needs. Taking an objective approach. What I mean by objective is taking that step back and looking in at the situation. Life is busy. You're busy people. You've got busy schedules. You live busy lives. And sometimes it's really important to try and step out of the situation and look in and think about, you know, visualize yourself in your everyday role. Visualize the amount you do. Think about it. Write it down. And also, on the other hand, think about if the roles were reversed. If you were the person that was living with chronic migraine and the other person was the caregiver. Sometimes this can support you in perspective sharing and gaining perspective about the situation that may provide or help some clarity about the situation emerge for you. And last but not least on the list there is shedding the guilt. The word guilt has come up a lot. It has come up a lot in my talks, meetings with Deirdre. It has come up in the work I do with people that live with chronic migraine, carers of people that live with chronic conditions. It just, I know my own relationship with guilt when it comes to my loved ones or my family. It comes up a lot. Shedding the guilt is extremely important, and what you do as caregivers is difficult and it's extremely important, but you are important too, very important as well. So it's extremely important that you take care of yourselves first and foremost. So that is it from me.